Welcome to this very last presentation. We have 5 hours of discussion, debating until midnight. We have plenty of time. Well, we come back to one of the first presentations this morning to the same site of La Draga. We are in northeastern Catalonia. There is also a palimpsest structure excavating in a lake, and Vasiliki has presented many archaeological aspects of this site. Specifically, the main problem is that we have 3 different sectors with different preservation, different taphonomic processes, and we are asking how to relate the different sectors to create an integral visualization or understanding on the formation process of the site. So in this presentation, what I would like to insist is on testing why the models Vasiliki has presented are correct. Why we can relate sector A with sector BD. In this presentation, we are still waiting for the results from sector C. And the idea is including radiocarbon data. We are still waiting for uranium data for the geological layers and dendrochronological data. Maybe next year we can present with a model with all kind of information. And we are using Chronomodel, the new release 2.0. It was presented at the end of February. This is a program created by Philippe Lanos from the University of Rennes and CNRS in Rennes and his team. And we acknowledge him for all the kind of questions that we have made for this problem. It exists in different versions. You have a Macintosh version, Windows, Linux, etc. The main idea of the software is the possibility of creating or integrating calibrations for isolated events or integrating Bayesian modeling and Markov chain algorithms. Well, the basic element in Chronomodel and also in our model is the idea of the positional event and not the idea of stratigraphic unit. That means a stratigraphic unit has some kind of temporality that is not very well covered. In that sense, we distinguish within a stratigraphic unit the formation of an occupational floor, the use of that occupational floor, and finally, the abandonment or collapse of that floor. Let me begin with sector A from our side. This is the driest part of the excavation, well above the water table and the phreatic level, and with very bad preservation of timber structures. Only the bottom part of wood posts have been preserved. From this section, we have around 16 stratigraphic units, and we have divided all those stratigraphic units into 35 depositional events. Here, this is the model using a Chronomodel, and color is just the kind of depositional event. At the bottom, you will have the events which are related with the creation of the platform, and in different color, not any kind of temporal or stratigraphic relationship, but the functionality, if this is the use of the occupational floor or maybe the collapse of the previous one. The prior information is just what we know about Early Neolithic and Western Mediterranean and the chronology for the cardial wear. That is, theoretically, there is a uniform distribution more or less between 5,300 BC until 4,500 also BC. In the absence of any other stratigraphical analysis, we obtain this preliminary model. This is the idea of we have just 16 independent depositional events. But this is wrong, because we know that depositional events are temporally and stratigraphically related. So the first thing is to include the stratigraphic relationship. Only stratigraphy. That means standard Harris matrix. You have the Harris matrix from this sector, and the way you can introduce a subset of this Harvest matrix, if you wish, the DAC, the durated cyclic graph, into the kernel model. In the present version, you cannot include empty nodes. You only include nodes representing depositional events and with information about chronology. That means that you will include here, you will include here all the references about the chronology. Here, this is a depositional event, and we have a single data for this depositional event. Here you have a depositional event with two different chronologies because we have taken two different samples from the same depositional event. All of those are the construction platform. This is the beginning of the stratigraphic unit. This is the abandonment probably of this structure, and this is a secondary occupation layer. For the moment, the only we know is the stratigraphic things. Let me see an example. This is the structure 258. Here we have a sample from wood, from the post. We have here some animal bone found in this hole, and it comes probably from later times. It is related with the abandonment of this structure. And finally, another bone here, completely unrelated with this. And this is the Bayesian analysis of this particular stratigraphic relationship. We have here integrating the ideal stratigraphy with the micromorphological analysis to understand exactly what we are thinking about all the different things. Another case, this is the structure 261. The main problem is that we have two different dates for different posts related with the same depositional event. The main problem is that both dates are completely different. They come from two different posts for the same platform. And we are calculated the standard chi-square analysis, and both are independent things. Of course, there are some problems related with the calibration curve because of very, very minor differences in data, and we found this part of the calibration. Here, there are some effects of the calibration curve, and we are not exactly sure. But in any case, we cannot integrate both data. Here, two different data, probably related to two different depositional events. And now, in the same structure, we have this relationship. We have this abandonment here related with two different initial depositions. They are not exactly related, but both are before this one. And this one is before this another one. And here you have the result of the Bayesian analysis according to these stratigraphical relationships. The idea of phase. This is something that thereafter we can discuss in the discussion, because I don't like, absolutely not, the word phase. Because phase has a very strong meaning in physics, and we archaeologists, we are using completely different ways. And each team speaks about phase in a completely different thing. So I will prefer to use phase in the physical sense and not in the archaeological sense. But this is a question that we can debate thereafter. In kernel model, you can introduce a separate phase model. That means all the depositional events which are contemporary according to archaeological data and archaeological inference. In this idea, we will have these different depositional events which are contemporary, this one and the other. Here you can find how we can relate in colors. That is the beginning related with the first. There is a secondary occupational phase, and there is a preliminary occupation floor, a secondary occupation floor, and finally a third maybe. And here you have the result. Here you have the preliminary one, the secondary one, the third, and finally the final one. There is probably inversion here that we should reorder the graph. But probably this one is previous as the other one. Now we go to the second sector, B and D. This is below the phreatic level with wonderful preservation of all timber structures. Here you have the original dates we have. There's a problem because we have an apparently aberrant date from 3700 BC, completely unrelated with that, but this is probably a problem of corruption somewhere. Preliminary analysis, the first scenario, that is impossible, but considering that we have different unrelated independent depositional events, and now we are building the stratigraphy. Here you have the general stratigraphy, you have some micromorphological columns we used to relate, and here you have the DAC associated with chronomodel. In this case, you have some data. We're waiting for some uranium data about the Lake Marl, so we can date the origins of the occupation, a preliminary occupation level. It's divided into a first construction of the platform, a secondary level of use. There is a level of travertines used to create a secondary platform, this time not in wood but using stones, and different layers until the modern pit formation. And here you have the Bayesian modeling of just the stratigraphic information. Then we are using the chronological information, that means the archaeological information about contemporary relationships, and you can see that we have a preliminary phase related with the construction of the platform, a secondary related probably with the use of that platform, not very separated temporally, and finally two other phases until the last abandonment. And here you have the solution. Here the platform construction, or phase one of the site, the occupational flow related with this platform. We will have a secondary occupation. Probably there is a chronological gap between here and here. Later we will arrive here. And the third one. Now we can integrate both sectors, sector A and sector BD. Here you have more or less the things. That's sector A and sector BD. You can see that there is an apparent contemporaneity here, but in sector A, maybe we can test a secondary occupation. But the preliminary occupation is more or less contemporary here. We have here two sectors of occupational probably related with this structure here, both in BD, in the sector BD and sector A, and later levels will be another the phase 3 with a probably archaeological gap here and the final occupations here. We have integrated everything into the model. So the chronological model, the phase model, if you wish, is the same for both sectors and imposing temporal order on both sectors. And this is the final conclusion of the Bayesian model, integrating the platforms and the occupations levels. Chronomodel allows also to create some tempo plots. I think Tom Dye has already presented them, and this is an implementation of tempo plots and of phase activities. Using this information, not in all cases is relevant for this excavation, because in most cases we have just one single data, and it's impossible to establish some duration with one single data. But it allows to a re-examination of the model, now including new temporal information. That means the duration of each depositional event. In the first case, we have dendrochronological information that indicates that the buildings were used for periods of 20 years. And we can impose here in the model a duration of 20 years for each phase. You can introduce different durations depending on the archaeological information you have about, and of course indicating probably hiatus. This hiatus can be obtained from the previous phase activity. And now we can create a secondary model including all those information. How to present all that? Well, this is a ideal spatiotemporal or stratigraphy temporal thing. You have here stratigraphy depth, and you have here time. The idea is that theoretically a very strong volume stratigraphic unit occupies a lot of time. And here, if you wish, you see, you can use the standard Allen Algebra to understand the relationships between the depositional events. Of course, it depends on your previous functional analysis of what does it mean, a depositional event. Is this the construction of the occupational floor? Is that the use of this occupational floor? Or finally, is it the abandonment? Because in theory, the construction is much more precise in time, less interval, but the abandonment probably has higher interval and higher stratigraphical volume. And with this presentation, theoretically, we can begin to maybe substitute Harvey's matrix into this kind of graphics of durations and stratigraphical tests. But it's not the only way of presenting things, because we are trying to convert that into a four-dimensional representation of time. Five-dimensional if we include animation, as you have already presented for some of your models. But it's plenty of different possibilities of taking and including the stratigraphic information and the temporal information. We insist that these two different ways of ordering the archaeological information, there are some relationships, but also they are non-linearly related. Not any kind of stratigraphic relationship is understandable in temporal terms. And many of times, temporal relationships cannot be adequately expressed in stratigraphic relationships. And that's all. Thank you very much.